The Soul's hammer flew through space faster than she had moved in 50 years. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Boram wiped sweat from her forehead as she pushed the old fusion cores beyond their safety limits. The ship groaned and shook, but she held together. "How much faster can we go?" Captain Dongwu asked over the intercom. "We're already at 110% of maximum safe speed," Boram replied. "If I push her any harder, we might lose the engines completely." "Do it anyway. Push her to 120%. Boram smiled grimly. "Aye, sir." She had served on the Soul's hammer for 15 years. She knew every bolt, every wire, every circuit in the ship. The old girl was tough, built in an age when ships were made to last forever. Boram coaxed more power from systems that should have been replaced decades ago. On the bridge, Navigation Officer Yu Jin was studying the ship's historical records. What she found amazed her. The Soul's hammer had not always been a simple patrol ship. Her original name was Soul's Wrath, and she was the most feared battleship in Earth's fleet during the resource wars of 2156. "Captain," Yu Jin called out, "you need to see this." Dongwu walked over to her station. On the screen were the original blueprints of the ship. Yu Jin pointed to sections highlighted in red. "These are dormant systems," she said. "Rail cannons, depleted uranium ammunition, reactive armor plating. They're all still here, just powered down and hidden behind false walls. Can we activate them? In theory, yes. But it would take major modifications. We'd need to reroute power, remove the fake panels, and manually restart systems that have been offline for 2 centuries. Dongwu nodded. "Get Boram up here. We have work to do." In the medical bay, Dr. Sunmi was reviewing everything known about Villani biology. She wanted to be ready to help survivors if they found any. But what she discovered in the alien medical files made her stomach turn. The Thackeray didn't just enslave people with mental powers. They harvested them. They kept them alive but took pieces of their brains, their nervous systems, their very souls to power their weapons. It was a process so horrible that most civilized species refused to even discuss it. Sunmi read report after report of Thackeray raids. Always the same pattern. They would attack suddenly with overwhelming force. They would kill anyone who resisted and take anyone with psychic abilities. The captured ones were never seen again. But buried in the files was something else. A theory from a Volcari scientist who had studied Thackeray technology for decades. The alien weapons that made the Dominion so feared, their planet-killing cannons, their shield-piercing beams, all of them required living minds to function. Without a constant supply of psychic slaves, the Thackeray fleet would become just another group of ships. Sunmi highlighted this information and sent it to Captain Dongwu. If they could somehow disrupt the harvesting operation, they might have a chance. In the armory, Master Sergeant Tae Yang was taking inventory of their weapons. What he found was not encouraging. The Soul's hammer carried standard patrol equipment, plasma rifles, riot gear, personal shields. Nothing that could stand against the Kari battle armor, but Tae Yang was a resourceful man. He had fought pirates, smugglers, and rebels across 3 star systems. He knew that sometimes the best weapon was the one your enemy didn't expect. "Private Wansu," he called to one of the young Marines, "help me move these crates." Behind the standard equipment lockers, they found older storage areas that had been sealed since the ship's conversion. Tai Yang broke open the security locks and looked inside. Ancient rifles lay in neat rows, kinetic weapons that fired solid bullets instead of energy beams, explosive rounds designed to punch through heavy armor, combat knives forged from earth steel, weapons that were 300 years old but still deadly. "Why would they keep all this old stuff?" Wansu asked. "Because sometimes old is better than new," Tae Yang replied. "The Thackeray designed their defenses to stop modern weapons. Energy shields, plasma deflectors, beam dispersers, but I bet they've never seen a good old-fashioned bullet." On the bridge, Communications Officer Hyojin was trying to gather more intelligence about the situation at Kepler 442. She scanned all frequencies, looking for any signal from the Villani system. What she found was mostly silence, but occasionally she caught fragments of Thackeray communications. The alien language was harsh and guttural, but Hyojin had studied it for years. She understood enough to piece together what was happening. The Thackeray fleet was massive, at least 20 ships, including several of their giant harvest vessels. They were methodically working through the Villani population, taking anyone with useful abilities. But there was something else in the transmissions. References to the Great Weapon and the Final Harvest. The Thackeray were not just raiding Kepler 442 for slaves. They were preparing for something bigger. "Captain," Hyejin said, "I think that the Kari are planning to attack Earth soon. These raids are just the beginning." Dongwu's face was grim. "How long do we have?" "Based on their communications, maybe a few weeks. They're gathering power for something they call the Burning Path." While his crew worked frantically to prepare for battle, Dongwu walked through the old corridors of his ship. He had served on her for 10 years, but he was learning things about her he had never known. In the lower decks, Boram had found the original power distribution center. Massive conduits that could channel enough energy to run a small city lay dormant behind maintenance panels. The ship's current engines used maybe 10% of her real capacity. "If we bring all these systems online," Boram explained, "the Soul's Hammer will be the most powerful ship in human space. But it will also make us a target every sensor in 3 systems can see." "Do it," Dongwu ordered. In the weapons bay, Yujin had discovered something remarkable. The rail cannons were not just functional, they were loaded. Depleted uranium shells sat in their magazines, waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Each shell weighed as much as a small car and could punch through a moon. "The ammunition is still good after all these years?" Dongwu asked. "Better than good. These shells are made from the densest material humanity knows how to work with. When they hit something at near light speed, nothing can stop them." As the ship raced toward Kepler 442, the crew worked around the clock. False walls came down, revealing weapon ports that had been hidden for centuries. Armor plating slid into position, transforming the patrol ship back into her original configuration. Power flowed through conduits that had been dark for decades. The Soul's Hammer was remembering what she used to be. But even as they worked, everyone knew the odds they faced. The Thakari Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their ships carried weapons that could destroy planets. Their crews were trained from birth for war. Humanity had one old ship and 45 people who had volunteered for what might be a suicide mission. "Sir," Ensign Minho called from the sensor station, "I'm picking up something strange." "What kind of strange?" "Energy readings from deep space. Multiple ships moving at high speed." Dongwu felt his heart sink. "Thakari? I don't think so. The energy signatures are wrong. These are human ships." On the main screen, 5 vessels appeared. They were different classes: a mining ship, 2 cargo haulers, a passenger liner, and an old military transport. None of them were warships. "Incoming message," Hyejin announced. The screen flickered and showed the face of an older woman in a merchant captain's uniform. Her name was Captain So Young, and she commanded the cargo vessel Incheon's Pride. "Captain Dongwu, we intercepted your course heading. We know where you're going and why." "Ma'am, this is a military operation. I can't ask civilians to—" "You're not asking. We're volunteering." Her voice was firm. "The Villani saved my crew 3 years ago when pirates attacked us near Rigel. We owe them." One by one, the other ship captains appeared on screen. Each had their own reason for joining. The mining ship Busan's Fortune had lost friends to Thackeray raids. The passenger liner Daegu Star carried refugees who had escaped from conquered worlds. The transport Olsen's Hope was commanded by a former military officer who couldn't stand by while innocents suffered. "This is madness," Dongwu said. "You're not warships. You don't have weapons or armor." Captain So Young smiled. "Maybe not, but we have cargo holds full of industrial equipment, mining explosives, construction tools, and we have crews who know how to improvise." As the 6 ships formed up and continued toward Kepler 442, Dongwu realized something important. This was not just about saving the Villani anymore. This was about what humanity stood for. The refusal to let evil win, the determination to help those who could not help themselves. The Soul's Hammer might be an old ship with an impossible mission, but she was not alone. In her engine room, Boram felt the ship's heartbeat growing stronger as more systems came online. In the weapons bay, Taeyang cleaned rifles that had not been fired in 2 centuries. On the bridge, Yujin calculated firing solutions for cannons that could crack asteroids. And in the medical bay, Sunmi prepared for casualties while hoping they would find survivors to help. The small human fleet raced through the darkness, carrying the hopes of the living and the fury of the dead. Behind them, space was empty and cold. Ahead lay the unknown. But Captain Dongwu looked at his crew and his unexpected allies, and he felt something that the Kari had forgotten existed. The Kepler 442 system appeared on their screens like a vision from hell. Where once a beautiful blue-green world had spun peacefully around its yellow star, now fires burned across entire continents. The oceans were red with ash and blood. The polar ice caps were melting from the heat of orbital bombardment. Captain Dongwu stood on the bridge of the Soul's Hammer, watching the destruction. Around the dying planet, massive Thakari ships moved like sharks around wounded prey. Their hulls were black and smooth, covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. "Count them," Dongwu ordered. Navigation Officer Yujin's fingers flew over her console. 23 combat vessels, sir. 8 dreadnoughts, 10 cruisers, and 5 of those harvest ships. Plus dozens of smaller support craft. The numbers were overwhelming. Even at full strength, the human fleet would be outnumbered 50-1. But they had not come this far to turn back now. "Any signs of survivors on the planet?" Dongwu asked. Dr. Sunmi checked her medical sensors. "I'm reading life signs in the southern continent. Maybe 10,000 Villani scattered across several cities. But the readings are weak. They're hurt, hiding, dying." Communications Officer Hiejin was listening to Thakari transmissions. Her face was pale with anger as she translated their callous discussions of the harvest efficiency and processing schedules. "Sir," she said, "they're not just taking the psychics anymore. They're experimenting on regular Villani too, trying to artificially create the abilities they want." Master Sergeant Tae Yang spat on the deck. "Animals. They're worse than animals." Chief Engineer Bo Ram's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, all systems are online. The old girl is ready to show these aliens what human engineering looks like." Dongwu took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked came down to the next few minutes. "Open a channel to all Thakari vessels," he ordered. "Sir?" Heejin looked confused. "All of them?" "All of them. I want every alien in this system to hear what I have to say." The channel opened. Dongwu's voice carried across space to reach every Thakari ship. "This is Captain Dongwu of the Terran vessel Soul's Hammer. You have 30 seconds to cease your operations and withdraw from this system." The response was immediate. Harsh alien laughter filled the bridge. Then a voice spoke in heavily accented but clear human language. "I am Admiral Zethmok of the Dominion flagship Void's Edge. You amuse us, little human. One primitive ship challenges the might of the Dominion. Your species' stupidity is legendary, but this exceeds even our expectations." More laughter from the Thakari fleet. On their screens, the alien ships began turning toward the human vessels. Weapon ports opened like hungry mouths. "You have 10 seconds to surrender," Admiral Zethmok continued, "or we will demonstrate why your kind fears the dark between stars." Dongwu smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Admiral, there's something you should know about this primitive ship." "And what is that, soon-to-be-dead human?" "She remembers when your people first crawled out of their caves, and she's been waiting 300 years to remind you what happens when you threaten the innocent." The laughter stopped. "All ships," Dongwu announced on the fleet frequency, "weapons free. Show them what humans do to bullies." What happened next defied every tactical prediction in the galaxy. The Soul's Hammer erupted in light as hidden armor plates slammed into position. Weapon ports that had been disguised as maintenance hatches opened to reveal rail cannons as long as city blocks. The ship's reactor output jumped to levels that made nearby space glow with radiation. But it was not just the transformation that shocked the Thakari. It was the first salvo. Depleted uranium shells, each one accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, screamed across the void toward the alien fleet. The Thakari had energy shields that could deflect plasma, lasers, and particle beams. They had never faced chunks of ancient Earth metal traveling fast enough to punch holes in reality itself. The first shell hit Admiral Zethmok's flagship dead center. The Thakari shield sparked and failed. The shell continued through 3 decks of alien armor like it was paper, before exploding inside the ship's power core. The Void's Edge. "Pride of the Dominion fleet, broke in half. What in the void was that?" A Thakari captain screamed over the radio. "Kinetic kill vehicles," Yujin announced calmly as she targeted the next ship, also known as really big bullets. The rail cannons fired again. And again. Each shot was perfectly aimed, perfectly timed. Thakari ships that had conquered worlds died like insects swatted by an angry giant. But the human fleet was not relying on the Soul's Hammer alone. The civilian ships had been busy during their journey to Kepler 442. The mining vessel, Busan's Fortune, opened her cargo holds, and launched clouds of industrial explosives. Each charge was designed to break asteroids apart, but they worked just as well against alien hulls. The passenger liner Daegu Star had converted her luxury suites into missile batteries. Guided rockets streaked from her hull, each one carrying a warhead filled with mining charges and construction demolition equipment. The cargo ship Inchin's Pride had the most devastating surprise of all. Her holds contained refined metals bound for a new colony. Under Chief Engineer Boram's instructions, they had converted the entire cargo into one massive railgun slug. When fired from their improvised cannon, it moved fast enough to crack a moon. The Thakari fleet, so used to fighting opponents who relied on advanced technology and elegant tactics, had no defense against primitive human fury applied with surgical precision. Return fire. Admiral Zethmok, second-in-command, ordered from the remaining half of the flagship. Destroy these insects. Plasma cannons and energy beams lashed out from the surviving Thakari ships, but the humans were ready for that too. The Soul's Hammer's ancient armor was not made from modern composite materials. It was forged from earth steel, layered and hardened by techniques that were old when humanity first reached for the stars. Plasma that could melt through modern hulls barely scratched her surface. The civilian ships were more vulnerable, but they had advantages too. They were not military vessels, so they did not register as serious threats on Thakari targeting systems. By the time the aliens realized their mistake, half their fleet was gone. "This is impossible," a Thakari captain cried. "Humans don't fight like this. They use computers and guided missiles and careful strategies." Master Sergeant Taeyang's voice came over the open channel. He was leading a boarding party onto a crippled alien cruiser. "Maybe the humans you knew before did, but you just woke up the humans who built the old ships, the humans who learned to fight in the dark between worlds." The sound of kinetic rifles echoed through the Thakari ship. The aliens inside discovered that their personal shields, designed to stop energy weapons, offered no protection against solid bullets fired from weapons their ancestors would have recognized. On the bridge of the Soul's Hammer, Communications Officer Hyejin was broadcasting on all Thakari frequencies, but she was not translating anymore. She was speaking in perfect Dominion High Command dialect, learned from years of studying their language. "This is Lieutenant Hyejin of the Terran Defense Force," she announced. "To all Thakari vessels still capable of receiving this message, you came here to harvest the innocent. Instead, you have awakened something your species forgot existed." A surviving Thakari captain responded with panic in his voice. "What are you?" "We are the descendants of predators who learned to build ships. We are the children of warriors who refuse to die quietly. We tell our young stories about monsters in the dark, and then we teach them how to kill those monsters." The battle was turning into a massacre. Thakari ships that had terrorized dozens of worlds fled from a single human battleship and her civilian escorts, but Dongwu was not content to simply drive them away. "Yujin," he ordered, "target their harvest ships specifically. Those are the ones carrying the Villani prisoners." "Aye, sir, but those ships are heavily shielded." "Then we get creative." The Soul's Hammer changed tactics. Instead of trying to destroy the harvest ships outright, she targeted their escort vessels. One by one, the Thakari warships that protected the slave haulers were eliminated. Soon the massive harvest ships hung defenseless in space, their hulls bristling with containment cells and processing equipment. "This is Captain Dongwu to all surviving Thakari vessels. Release your prisoners immediately, or I will demonstrate what a depleted uranium shell does to an unarmored target." There was silence on the Thakari channels. Then slowly the harvest ships began ejecting escape pods, hundreds of them, each containing Villani survivors who had been marked for processing. Dr. Sun Mi coordinated the rescue operation. The civilian ships used their cargo handling equipment to collect the escape pods. Many of the Villani inside were injured, traumatized, barely alive, but they were free. As the last rescue pod was recovered, Admiral Zethmok's voice came over the radio one final time. His flagship was dying around him, life support failing, but his hatred was stronger than ever. "This changes nothing, humans. You have won one battle against a minor expedition. The full might of the Dominion will fall upon your worlds like the fury of dying stars. We will burn your planets to ash and use your children to power our weapons." The Helix Nebula stretched before them like a cosmic graveyard. Purple and green gases swirled in patterns that hid the greatest horror in the galaxy. Somewhere in those clouds, Millions of innocent beings were being systematically tortured and killed to power the Thakari war machine. Captain Dongwu stood on the bridge of the Soul's Hammer, studying the sensor readings. The nebula was massive, hundreds of light years across, filled with radiation and magnetic fields that would hide their approach, but it would also hide the enemy. "What are we looking at?" he asked Navigation Officer Yu Jin. "The installation is in the center of the nebula, hidden in a gas pocket. It's huge, Captain. At least 50 kilometers across, with defensive platforms scattered throughout the surrounding area." Communications Officer Hyejin was monitoring Thakari transmissions. "They know we're coming. They've been tracking our approach since we entered the outer gas clouds. They're calling us the human plague and mobilizing everything they have." Chief Engineer Boram's voice crackled from the engine room. "Captain, the nebula gases are interfering with our sensors and weapons targeting. We're going to be fighting half-blind in there." Master Sergeant Taeyang checked his equipment one more time. "Makes it fair, then. They can't see us either." The Allied fleet had grown during their journey. More survivors had joined them, bringing intelligence about Thakari operations and weaknesses in their defenses. But even with 47 ships, they were still vastly outnumbered. Elder Vel Thera, who had insisted on joining the strike team despite her injuries, stood beside Captain Dongwu. "The processing center will be heavily guarded," she warned. "The Thakari consider their psychic harvesting technology their greatest secret. They will fight to the death to protect it." "Good," Dongwu replied. "Then when we destroy it, they'll know their empire is finished." The first sign of the enemy came as flashes of energy through the swirling gases. Thakari patrol ships, sleek and deadly, emerged from the nebula like sharks sensing blood in the water. "All ships weapons free," Dongwu ordered. "Remember the plan. We punch through their defenses and get to that installation. Everything else is secondary." The Soul's Hammer opened fire with her rail cannons, sending depleted uranium shells screaming through the nebula. The first Thakari patrol ship exploded before it even knew what hit it. But more were coming. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. In the swirling gases of the nebula, ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Energy beams lanced through the clouds, followed by solid projectiles that punched through hulls with unstoppable force. The Kithara stealth ship Shadow's Edge lived up to her reputation, appearing behind Thakari vessels and destroying them before they could react. The Zenith warriors aboard the cruiser Valor's Fire proved that their fighting spirit had not been broken by 20 years of guerrilla warfare. But it was the human tactics that shocked the Thakari the most. Instead of engaging in careful, calculated combat, the Soul's Hammer and her allies fought with a savage intensity that defied all military logic. "They're not following standard battle protocols," a Thakari commander screamed over the radio. "They're attacking everything at once. How do we respond to chaos?" Navigation Officer Yu Jin had the answer. "You don't. You just die." As the Allied fleet fought their way through the outer defenses, Dr. Sunmi was preparing for what they would find at the installation. The medical bay was equipped for mass casualties, but she knew that many of the prisoners they rescued would be beyond help. "How long has this installation been operating?" she asked Elder Velthera. "At least 50 years, maybe longer. The Thakari have been perfecting their harvesting techniques for generations." The thought of the suffering that had occurred in this place made Sunmi's hands shake with anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. The prisoners would need her skills, not her rage. The great harvest installation appeared through the nebula gases like a vision from hell. It was a massive structure, part space station, part factory, part prison. Towers and platforms extended in all directions, connected by bridges and tubes that pulsed with dark energy. And surrounding it were defensive platforms, weapons batteries, and patrol ships in numbers that made the earlier battle seem like a skirmish. "Sweet Mother of Earth," Communications Officer Hyejin whispered. "There must be 1,000 ships guarding that thing." "Then we'll have to kill 1,000 ships," Captain Dongwu replied. What happened next became legend throughout the galaxy. The Soul's Hammer, supported by her ragtag fleet of allies, charged straight into the heart of the strongest Thakari position in known space. The ancient battleship's armor plates, forged from earth steel and hardened by centuries of use, turned aside energy beams that could slice through planets. Her rail cannons fired continuously, each shot precisely aimed to cause maximum destruction. But it was not just the weapons that made the difference. It was the people using them. Chief Engineer Boram pushed the ship's power systems far beyond their theoretical limits, coaxing energy from conduits that should have melted under the load. Navigation Officer Yujin plotted courses through defensive fire that no computer could have calculated, relying on intuition and desperation. Master Sergeant Taeyang led boarding parties onto Thakari platforms, and the enemy discovered that human Marines armed with kinetic weapons were a nightmare they had never prepared for. Their energy shields and plasma armor were useless against bullets fired by people who had grown up hunting for food. Communications Officer Hyojin did something that changed the entire battle. Instead of just jamming Thakari communications, she began broadcasting to the prisoners inside the installation. "This is Lieutenant Hyojin of the Human Fleet," she announced in a dozen different languages. "We are here to rescue you. Fight back. Break your chains. Show these monsters what happens when the enslaved refuse to stay silent." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Inside the Great Harvest installation, millions of prisoners who had given up hope suddenly found reason to resist. They sabotaged equipment, attacked guards, and created chaos that the Thakari could not control. But the real turning point came when Dr. Sunmi made a discovery that changed everything. "Captain," she called from her analysis station, "I've been studying the energy readings from the installation. The psychic amplification process they're using. It's not just converting people into power sources. It's creating a feedback loop." "What does that mean?" "It means if we can overload their primary harvesting center, the energy backlash will destroy every psychic-powered weapon in the sector. Every Thakari ship will lose its primary armaments." Elder Velthera understood immediately. But the explosion would kill everyone still connected to the harvesting equipment. Millions of prisoners would die. The choice was terrible: save the prisoners and leave the Thakari with their weapons, or destroy the installation and free the galaxy from their tyranny at the cost of innocent lives. Captain Dongwu made the decision that defined humanity's character. "We save everyone. All of them. Every single prisoner comes off that station before we destroy it." "Sir, that's impossible. There are millions of people in there. Then we better work fast." What followed was the greatest rescue operation in galactic history. While the Soul's Hammer and her allies held off wave after wave of Thakari reinforcements, teams of volunteers began evacuating the installation. The rescued Kethera used their knowledge of Thakari technology to disable security systems. Zenith warriors fought hand-to-hand with alien guards in the prison blocks. Human Marines carried people who were too weak to walk, and Elder Velthera, despite her injuries, used her psychic abilities to coordinate the evacuation, guiding rescue teams to hidden prison sections and secret laboratories. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships were destroyed, heroes fell, and the nebula burned with the fires of war. But slowly, impossibly, the prisoners began to escape. Transport ships arrived from every corner of the galaxy as word of the rescue spread. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, even military ships diverted from their missions to help. The greatest alliance in galactic history was forged not by treaties or politics, but by the simple desire to help those in need. When the last prisoner was evacuated, Captain Dongwu gave the order that ended the Thakari Empire forever. "All ships withdraw to minimum safe distance. Yujin, target the primary harvesting core." "Targeting solution confirmed, sir." "Fire." The depleted uranium shell that destroyed the Great Harvest installation was not the largest projectile the Soul's Hammer had ever fired, but it was the most important. When it struck the psychic amplification core, the resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the dimensional fabric of space itself. Every Thakari ship within 50 light-years lost power instantly. Their weapons went dark. Their shields failed. Their engines died. An empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was reduced to helpless metal floating in space. The survivors surrendered without firing another shot. In the months that followed, the galaxy was transformed. The freed prisoners became ambassadors for their species, telling the story of humanity's sacrifice and courage. The Thakari, stripped of their psychic weapons, were forced to become a peaceful civilization or face extinction. Commander Jiho was drinking his third cup of coffee when the universe changed forever. The monitoring station Aegis Prime floated in the dark between stars, far from any planet or sun. It was a lonely place, but someone had to watch the deep space frequencies. Someone had to listen for trouble. The signal came at 0347 hours, ship time. Jiho almost missed it. The computers were handling thousands of routine messages. Cargo ships reporting their positions. Mining stations asking for supplies. Families sending letters across the void. But this signal was different. It was weak, broken, and filled with fear. "Lieutenant Hyojin, get over here," Jiho called across the control room. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. Something about this signal made his skin crawl. Hyojin hurried over from her desk. She was the best language expert in the outer sectors. If anyone could make sense of alien communications, it was her. She plugged her headset into the console and listened. Her face went pale. "Sir, this is bad," she said. "It's from the Villani colony on Kepler 442b. They're screaming for help." The Villani were peaceful creatures like tall, thin humans with blue skin and large eyes. They had never hurt anyone. They grew beautiful flowers and made amazing art. They were the kind of neighbors everyone wanted. "Play it on speakers," Jiho ordered. The message crackled through the control room. Even though it was in the Villani language, the terror was clear. Voices cried out over explosions and weapon fire. Someone was sobbing. Someone else was giving orders to evacuate the children. "Can you translate it?" Jiho asked. Hyojin's fingers flew over her keyboard. Words appeared on the main screen as the computer worked to decode the alien speech. What Jiho read made his coffee turn cold in his stomach. "Thakari ships in orbit. They came without warning. Harvesting our people. Taking the gifted ones. So many dead. Please, someone help us. They have star charts. They know where Earth is. They're coming for you next. We won't tell them. We'll die first. Remember us." The message cut off with the sound of plasma cannons firing. The control room was silent. Everyone stared at the screen. The Thakari Dominion was the stuff of nightmares. They were an empire that conquered worlds not for land or resources, but for people. They took anyone with special mental abilities, telepaths, those who could see the future, anyone with gifts that Thakari could use. "When was this sent?" Jiho asked. 14 hours ago, Hyojin replied. "The signal traveled a long way to reach us." Jiho felt sick. 14 hours. The Villani colony was probably gone by now. But the message said that Thakari had star charts. They knew where Earth was. Humanity's homeworld was in danger. "Get me Admiral Park at Fleet Command," Jiho ordered. "Emergency priority." While they waited for the connection, more of the crew gathered around the main screen. Word was spreading through the station. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. The view screen flickered and Admiral Park appeared. She was an old woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had fought in the border wars 20 years ago. She knew what real danger looked like. "What's the emergency, Commander?" she asked. Jiho played the Villani message. Admiral Park's face grew harder with each word. When it finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How reliable is this translation?" she asked. "Very reliable, ma'am," Hyojin answered. "The Villani language is well documented. There's no mistake." Admiral Park nodded slowly. "The Thakari haven't been seen in this sector for 50 years. We hoped they had moved on to other galaxies." "What are your orders, ma'am?" Jiho asked. "I'm calling an emergency fleet meeting, but it will take days to organize a response, maybe weeks." "Ma'am, with respect, the Villani might not have weeks." Admiral Park's expression was grim. "Commander, the Thakari travel in huge fleets. They have weapons we don't understand. Sending ships against them is sending our people to die." Jiho understood. The Thakari Dominion had conquered dozens of worlds. Their technology was hundreds of years ahead of humanity's. Their ships could destroy entire planets. Fighting them was madness. But as Jiho looked around the control room, he saw something in his crew's faces. Anger. The same anger he felt burning in his chest. The Villani were innocent. They didn't deserve what was happening to them. "Sir," a voice called from across the room. It was Ensign Tejo, barely 20 years old. "There's a ship requesting emergency docking. It's the Soul's Hammer." Jiho knew that ship. It was old, almost 300 years old. It was commanded by Captain Dongwu, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life. The Soul's Hammer was supposed to be patrolling the mining sectors looking for pirates. "What's Captain Dongwu doing out here?" Admiral Park asked. "I'll find out," Jiho replied. "Permission to allow docking?" "Granted. But I want to talk to him personally." An hour later, Captain Dongwu stood in the control room. He was a tall man with scarred hands and eyes that had seen too much. His uniform was old but clean. His boots were worn but polished. He looked like someone who had been fighting all his life. "I heard the message," he said without waiting for anyone to speak. "My communications officer picked it up while we were chasing smugglers." "Captain Dongwu," Admiral Park said from the view screen. "You're not seriously thinking of going to Kepler 442? "I am, ma'am. That's suicide. The Thakari will destroy you before you get close to the planet." Dongwu smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Maybe. But the Villani sent that message because they believed someone would help them. They died believing it. One ship can't make a difference against a Thakari fleet. Maybe not, but the Soul's Hammer isn't just any ship. Jiho was curious. "What do you mean?" "My great-grandfather served on her during the Resource Wars. Back then, she wasn't a patrol ship. She was a battleship, the most dangerous ship in Earth's fleet." Admiral Park leaned forward. "That was 200 years ago. She's been converted for patrol duty." "Converted, yes, but not gutted. The old systems are still there, buried deep in her hull. The weapons, the armor, the power cores, everything that made her feared across 3 star systems." The control room was quiet. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Was it possible? Could an ancient battleship, even one disguised as a patrol ship, stand against the Thakari? "Even if that's true," Admiral Park said, "you don't have the crew for a battleship. You have 30 people. A ship like that needs 300. Then I'll make do with 30. Dongwu's voice was firm. "Admiral, those people are dying right now. While we talk, the Thakari are taking them, using them, breaking them." Jiho felt the anger growing stronger in his chest. He looked at his crew. They felt it too. The need to do something, anything. "Captain," Jiho said, "what do you need from us?" Dongwu smiled for real this time. "Volunteers. Anyone who wants to make a difference." Admiral Park's voice was sharp. "Commander Jiho, you will not abandon your post." "Ma'am, request permission to temporarily transfer command of this station to Lieutenant Hai Jin. She's qualified." Request denied. Jiho took a deep breath. He had served in the fleet for 20 years. He had always followed orders. But sometimes orders weren't enough. "Then I resigned my commission, effective immediately." The control room erupted. Half the crew started volunteering to go with him. Admiral Park was shouting orders through the view screen. Dongwu just stood there waiting. When the noise died down, Admiral Park's voice was cold. "You're all making a terrible mistake." "Maybe," Jiho said, "but it's our mistake to make." 3 hours later, 15 members of Aegis Prime's crew were aboard the Soul's Hammer. The old ship felt different from modern vessels. The corridors were wider. The walls were thicker. Everything was built to last forever. As they prepared to depart, a final message came from the Villani system. It was short and weak but clear. "Please, remember us." Captain Dongwu stood on his bridge, surrounded by old controls and new volunteers. "Set course for Kepler 442, he ordered. "Maximum speed." The Soul's Hammer turned toward the distant stars and began to accelerate. Behind them, Aegis Prime grew smaller until it disappeared. Ahead lay the unknown. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Boram was already working on the modifications they would need. In the weapons bay, Master Sergeant Tae Yang was checking equipment that hadn't been used in decades. On the bridge, Navigation Officer Yu Jin was plotting their course through space. They all knew this was probably a suicide mission. The Thakari Dominion had never been defeated. Their ships were stronger, faster, and more advanced than anything humanity had. But as Captain Dongwu looked at his crew, both old and new, he felt something the Thakari had never understood. Hope, determination, the absolute refusal to let evil win without a fight. The Soul's Hammer raced through the darkness toward Kepler 442, carrying the dreams of the dead and the fury of the living. The battle was won, but the nightmare was far from over. As the human fleet gathered the escape pods and tended to the wounded, more horrors came to light. Deep scans of the planet revealed the true scope of Thakari operations. Dr. Sunmi worked frantically in the medical bay of the Soul's Hammer. Villani survivors filled every available space. Some had physical injuries from the bombardment. Others bore the terrible marks of Thakari experimentation. Surgical scars where pieces of their minds had been removed. Implants designed to harvest their psychic abilities. "How many did we save?" Captain Dongwu asked as he visited the medical bay. "About 3,000, Sunmi replied, not looking up from her patient. "But Captain, there were over 2 million Villani on this world when the attack began." The weight of those numbers hit everyone in the room. 3,000 saved out of 2 million? It was better than nothing, but it felt like failure. Elder Velthara, one of the rescued Villani leaders, spoke from her medical bed. Her voice was weak but determined. "You saved more than our lives, Captain Dongwu. You saved our hope. For days we believed the universe had abandoned us." "The universe, maybe," Dongwu replied, "but not humanity." Communications Officer Hye-jin entered the medical bay with a grim expression. "Captain, I've been monitoring long-range communications. The Thakari are mobilizing their entire sector fleet. They're calling what happened here the human incident and treating it as a major threat to the Dominion." "How long do we have?" "Based on their fleet movements, maybe 2 weeks before they arrive at Earth with enough ships to glass the entire planet." Master Sergeant Tae Yang looked up from cleaning his rifle. "Then we better get moving. Can't fight a war from here." But Navigation Officer Yu Jin had discovered something that complicated their plans. The Thakari installations on the planet were not just military bases. They were research facilities, and what they had been researching changed everything. "Captain, you need to see this," Yu Jin called from the bridge. On the main screen were images from the planet's surface, massive structures that looked like a cross between laboratories and factories, but it was what was inside them that made everyone's blood run cold. "They were trying to create artificial psychics," Yu Jin explained, "taking regular people from dozens of species and surgically altering them to develop mental powers, then harvesting those abilities to power their weapons." Chief Engineer Bo-ram joined them on the bridge. "That's not the worst part. I've been analyzing the wreckage of their ships. Their weapon systems are entirely dependent on psychic energy. Without a constant supply of mines to drain, their entire fleet becomes just fancy flying metal. The implications hit everyone at once. The Thakari Dominion's military power was built on slavery and murder. Every ship they had conquered worlds with was powered by the suffering of innocents. If we could cut off their supply of psychic prisoners," Sunmi said, "their entire empire would collapse." Elder Velthara had been listening from the medical bay intercom. "There are others," she said. "Other worlds the Thakari have conquered. Millions of prisoners held in processing centers across their territory. If you could free them." Captain So Young's voice came over the fleet communication system from the cargo ship Inchin's Pride. "Captain Dongwu, we found something you need to see." 20 minutes later, Dongwu stood in the cargo hold of the civilian vessel. Captain So Young had converted part of her ship into a refugee center, but that was not what she wanted to show him. "We recovered this from one of the Thakari harvest ships," she said, pointing to a strange device about the size of a coffin. It was covered in alien writing and pulsed with dark energy. "What is it?" "According to the Villani who were imprisoned with it, this is a psychic amplifier. It takes the mental energy from one person and multiplies it 1,000 times." Dongwu felt sick. They were using people as living batteries. Worse than that, this thing doesn't just drain psychic energy, it creates it. Any person put inside this device, whether they have natural abilities or not, develops massive mental powers. But the process kills them within hours. The captain of the mining ship Busan's Fortune joined the conversation. His name was Jae Sung, and he had lost friends to Thakari raids years earlier. "How many of these devices do they have?" he asked. "Based on their ship configurations, probably thousands," So Young replied. "Every major Thakari vessel carries at least one." The horror of it was overwhelming. The Thakari were not just conquering worlds for slaves. They were turning entire populations into fuel for their war machine. But Elder Velthara had more information that changed their understanding completely. "The processing centers," she said, "are not just on conquered worlds. The Thakari have mobile harvesting stations, entire fleets dedicated to processing prisoners and creating psychic energy." "Where?" Dongwu asked. "The Helix Nebula. They've built a massive installation there, hidden in the gas clouds. Millions of prisoners from dozens of species all being systematically converted into power sources." Communications Officer Hye-jin was already working on her console. "I'm picking up faint transmissions from that direction. It's heavily encoded, but I'm getting fragments. They're calling it the Great Harvest." Navigation Officer Yu Jin pulled up star charts. The Helix Nebula was 3 days away at maximum speed, but it was also deep in Thakari territory, surrounded by patrol fleets and defense platforms. "It would be suicide," Captain Jae Sung said. "Even if we could reach the installation, how could 6 ships fight an entire sector's worth of defenses?" But Dongwu was studying the tactical displays with a different perspective. "We don't need to fight their entire fleet. We just need to disrupt their power source. Chief Engineer Boram understood immediately. If we could destroy their psychic processing centers, every Thakari ship in the sector would lose primary power. More than that, Sunmi added. If we could free the prisoners and get them away from the harvesting equipment, the Thakari would lose their ability to create new weapons. The plan that emerged was ambitious and dangerous. The human fleet would split up. The civilian ships would carry as many Villani refugees as possible back to human space, spreading word of what had happened and preparing for the coming war. The Soul's Hammer would continue alone to the Helix Nebula, carrying a strike team to destroy the Great Harvest installation. But Elder Velthara had one more surprise. You will not go alone, she said. There are others. Survivors from other conquered worlds who have been waiting for someone to strike back. Over the next few hours, as they prepared to leave the Kepler 442 system, hidden transmissions began reaching the human fleet. Rebels hiding in asteroid fields, escaped prisoners living in deep space, survivors of a dozen different species who had lost everything to Thakari expansion. One by one, they began appearing. A Kithara stealth ship carrying former slaves who had learned to sabotage Thakari technology. A group of Zenith warriors who had been fighting a guerrilla war for 20 years. Even some Thakari defectors who had grown sick of their empire's brutality. By the time the fleet was ready to depart, 37 ships of various species and configurations had joined them. It was not a professional navy, but it was something more important, a coalition of survivors who refused to give up. Master Sergeant Tae Yang addressed the strike team that would board the harvesting installation. Human Marines stood alongside alien warriors, all carrying weapons designed to fight in the close confines of space stations. Remember, he told them, we're not just fighting for ourselves. Every person we free, every machine we destroy weakens the entire Dominion. Make every shot count. As the human fleet prepared to separate, Captain Dongwu stood on the bridge of the Soul's Hammer one last time with all his officers. I won't lie to you, he said. This next part is going to be the hardest thing any of us have ever done. The Helix Nebula is a fortress. We're going to be outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But sir, Communications Officer Hyejin said, we've already done the impossible once. That's right. We showed the galaxy that the Thakari can be beaten. Now we're going to show them that their entire empire is built on nothing but cruelty and fear. Chief Engineer Boram's voice came from the engine room. Captain, all systems are ready. The old girl is eager to finish what we started. Navigation Officer Yujin confirmed their course. Helix Nebula, 3 days at maximum speed. Course laid in. Dr. Sunmi had volunteered to stay with the strike team despite the danger. Someone needs to take care of the people we're going to rescue, she said simply. As the Soul's Hammer and her allies began the journey to the Helix Nebula, Captain Dongwu felt the weight of what they were attempting. They were not just trying to save prisoners or destroy an installation. They were trying to break the back of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. But as he looked around his bridge, at the faces of people who had volunteered for an impossible mission because it was the right thing to do, Dongwu felt something the Thakari had never understood. The power of hope armed with determination and backed by righteous fury. The Soul's Hammer raced toward the Helix Nebula, carrying the dreams of the enslaved and the promise of freedom. Behind her came ships from a dozen worlds, all united by a simple belief.